If you look at the coronation footage, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry with Camilla.
When Camilla was caught bullying Princess Charlotte in front of the other royals, she had no idea Catherine would see it, and what Catherine did next left the royal family stunned. From the very beginning, it wasn't what was said, but how it was said.
Queen Camilla may have made a gesture to Kate, Princess of Wales, involving Princess Charlotte.
The royal family had gathered for what should have been a pleasant spring luncheon at Windsor Castle, a balance of ceremonial duty and casual family time. Children were gently herded into a side salon, while adults mingled over champagne and light conversation. Charlotte, bright-eyed and full of life, had been placed among her younger cousins. It was there, amidst light-hearted games and polite giggles, that Queen Camilla leaned in and delivered her first blow, not physically, but emotionally. That wasn't all. Charlotte, who was eager and engaged in a guessing game, offered the answer to a question posed to her brother Louis. Camilla, rather than encouraging her, snapped lightly, "Don't speak unless you're spoken to, darling. No need to show off." The room, full of laughter a moment before, seemed to hush. To Camilla, it was likely a passing comment, but to Charlotte, it landed like a stone. Afterwards, something in Charlotte changed. She wasn't overtly angry, nor did she cry, but her spirit dulled. The change wasn't missed by Catherine, who had always trusted her instincts as a mother. She noticed her daughter wasn't being difficult, just unusually quiet, and her usual spark dimmed. Later, while Catherine was mid-conversation with a senior aide, she saw Charlotte pass the open corridor door alone, her expression pale and her mouth tightly drawn. No tears were shed, but the pain was visible. Catherine followed her to the far end of the hallway, where the child stood alone, her hands clasped and eyes fixed on the floor. It was then that Charlotte hesitantly confessed to Camilla's words during the game. Though she tried to brush it off, Catherine knew better. Something fundamental had been wounded in her daughter's sense of safety. But that wasn't the end of it. As the afternoon carried on, the royal children moved to the refreshment table for scones and tea. Charlotte, quietly reaching for a second scone, was met with yet another offhand comment from Camilla. "Perhaps one is enough, darling. We don't want to appear greedy." The words weren't harsh on their own, yet their precision stung. They carried the kind of passive aggression that left little room for interpretation. Catherine witnessed it. She didn't react immediately, but her silence that day became a vault, one that recorded and remembered everything. Even more disheartening was how Camilla seemed to reject Charlotte's attempts to engage innocently. Later in the same gathering, when the adults had retired to the gallery and the children joined them briefly, Charlotte asked Camilla if she could play the piano. It was a polite, sweet request, and the kind of gesture one might expect to be encouraged in a child of her age and upbringing. But Camilla, sipping water and smiling at another aide, turned to her with faint disdain. "That's not necessary," she said. "Let the grown-ups enjoy some peace. Why don't you sit still like a proper young lady?" No raised voice, no scolding, just a sentence wrapped in pointed calm. Charlotte's face flushed as she quietly closed her book and folded her hands in her lap. Catherine, standing nearby, caught every word. She didn't confront her at that moment, but the temperature of the room shifted. The interactions followed only confirmed the pattern. Camilla didn't scream or shout, but she had mastered the art of subtlety, that cruel tone only children and the most intuitive adults truly hear. At Highgrove, during another seemingly casual family gathering, Charlotte walked into the room, greeted Camilla with polite cheer, and was met with yet another undermining comment. "Are you sure you're not too tired to be here?" Camilla asked, with a slight edge to her voice. The remark was framed as concern, but was meant to dismiss. Once again, Charlotte was reduced to a guest in her own family. Charlotte later shared more with her mother as the veil of formality loosened in the quiet safety of bedtime. "Granny Camilla doesn't like it when I talk too much," she said with the honesty only a child can muster. It was this sentence, more than anything, that broke something inside Catherine. It wasn't a one-time misunderstanding. It was a belief Charlotte had come to hold about herself. Not because of who she was, but because of how she had been made to feel. Catherine didn't need to investigate further. The consistency of the subtle emotional bruises told her everything she needed to know. Camilla's words didn't target all the children. They didn't fall on George or Louis with the same frequency or tone. No, it was Charlotte who received the bulk of them. And that made it personal. Later, at Balmoral, another moment unfolded that sealed everything in Catherine's mind. The family was settling into their usual summer rhythms. Long walks, horseback riding, and baking afternoons. Charlotte, slowly recovering her usual spirit, spent time running through the fields and helping the staff in the kitchen. It was during one of these afternoons that Catherine, momentarily occupied, was informed that Charlotte was in the sunroom with Camilla. Immediately, her body stiffened. She walked briskly toward the sunroom, only to overhear Camilla's voice before entering. "We don't always need to speak over others, Charlotte. It's important to listen. Sometimes your mommy forgets that too." A quiet jab, disguised as etiquette, embedded with judgment. Catherine stepped into the room just then, her tone flat, her presence unmistakable. "I was looking for you, darling," she said to Charlotte, who got up and walked silently to her side. But Camilla, perhaps not expecting resistance, responded lightly. "I was just having a word." Catherine, steady and deliberate, replied, "I heard." When Camilla began to defend the comment, Catherine cut in. "She was only a child, and she doesn't need to be corrected for that every time she speaks." The boundary was clear now. No more smiles to cover discomfort. No more silence as currency. Camilla, never one to back down easily, folded her arms and said, "I've raised children. I know when a girl's growing too fast for her good." That final comment, disguised again as experience, exposed the depth of Camilla's perspective. She viewed Charlotte's confidence and liveliness not as strengths, but as liabilities. Catherine didn't flinch. "She's growing up just fine," she said, "and she'll do so without being made to feel like a problem." In those few words, a mother did what she had been holding back for months. The emotional cost on Charlotte had already started showing. The once outspoken, bubbly child had begun to hesitate before speaking, seeking her mother's eyes for approval. She no longer bounced into rooms. Instead, she peeked in. She wasn't less intelligent or less warm, she had simply learned to shrink. Catherine saw that, and it was that image of her daughter learning to blend into the background that became the final straw. So, the next time an event came up, a charity garden project spearheaded by Camilla and involving royal grandchildren, Catherine quietly opted out for Charlotte. She said she had a cold, but those close to the household knew better. Camilla reportedly raised an eyebrow when told. "Probably too delicate for a little mud," she said under her breath. Catherine heard that too. It was clear by then, the emotional undermining wasn't imagined. It wasn't a one-off comment. It was real, it was repeating, and it was harming a child. Catherine would no longer allow it. And from that moment, Camilla's presence in Charlotte's immediate sphere began to shrink. This is where it gets more interesting. Camilla, who is the queen consort, carries herself with the stately poise expected of someone who has journeyed from scandal to legitimacy within the royal family. Her approach to behavior, especially that of children, is steeped in tradition. Raised in a time when aristocratic children were seen but not heard, she expects the same conduct from her step-grandchildren. To her, a quiet child is a well-raised child. During public engagements, she expects George, Charlotte, and Louis to present a polished front with manners befitting their lineage. The moment young Louis voiced a cheeky comment at a palace event, Camilla reportedly raised an eyebrow, muttering about a lack of home discipline. It was not just disapproval. It was a clear attempt to impose her standard of royalty, one where obedience and silence ruled. However, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, holds a different philosophy. A modern mother shaped by psychology, empathy, and the challenges of raising children under intense public scrutiny, she believes in gentle parenting. For her, a child's tantrum is not an embarrassment. It is communication. She kneels to their eye level, listens before she speaks, and doesn't force a smile from them just to maintain appearances. Catherine has made it her life's mission to raise emotionally intelligent future royals. This does not sit well with Camilla, who sees such parenting as indulgence. Their conflicting beliefs are not just passive disagreements, but have split into moments of deep tension. Once, during a family brunch, Louis reportedly squirmed in his seat. Camilla sighed audibly and said, "Boys these days don't know how to behave like gentlemen." Catherine, calm but firm, responded, "They're still learning, Camilla, and we're guiding them every step of the way." At a garden party, Camilla leaned toward Charlotte and told her to keep her back straight, then remarked to a guest, "The girls in our day had such poise." It sounded harmless, but the intention was clear. Charlotte's natural ease was being framed as a flaw. These weren't simple corrections. They were strong reminders of who held authority. In a family where women have long been praised for their silence, Catherine, who saw it all, knew she had to step up for her daughter. At a Christmas Carol event, when Camilla tried to hush Louis, Catherine drew him into her lap instead, letting him sing. Later, she praised his enthusiasm. The gesture was small, but her message was obvious. Royal children are still children. Camilla, however, seems to believe her crown extends beyond ceremony. She corrected George's posture, remarked on Louis's restlessness, and suggested to aides that a firmer hand might be needed. Once, within Catherine's hearing, she told a friend, "Children need discipline, not therapy," a direct challenge to Catherine's gentler approach. Catherine did not push back with words. She held her ground through action. When Charlotte sought comfort after a sharp word from Camilla during a public event, Catherine simply kept her close. It was her refusal to let shame replace security. William supports her in subtler ways. He rarely confronts Camilla directly, but his choices speak for him. At a royal portrait unveiling, when Camilla suggested George stand beside her, William calmly replied, "Let him stand where he's comfortable." In the royal world, even that was defiance. Charles, meanwhile, walks a careful line. He values household peace and supports his wife. But he also recognizes Catherine's role in keeping the monarchy relatable. Once, after hearing of one of Camilla's remarks, he told an aide, "Catherine knows what she's doing." In royal terms, it was high praise. Beneath the family banters lies a larger question about the monarchy's future. Camilla represents tradition and hierarchy. Catherine and William lean toward empathy and adaptation. The tension between them is more than a family matter. It is a battle over what the crown should be in the years to come. This generational divide isn't about age alone. It's about values. For Camilla, discipline equates to dignity. For Catherine, dignity stems from being understood. In Camilla's world, emotion is weakness. In Catherine's world, emotion is strength. These differences are not easy to reconcile because they redefine what it means to raise a royal. Camilla once remarked that a throne doesn't raise itself, a nod to the belief that children must be sculpted into monarchy. Catherine, however, believes that identity precedes title, that love, not protocol, shapes a leader. These clashing ideologies continue to play out across palace walls through birthday celebrations, public outings, and even casual family dinners. There's more to this story. Catherine's confrontation with Camilla marked the turning point, a moment that would forever reshape how the queen consort interacted with her granddaughter. Catherine began to operate from a new place of assertiveness. No longer tolerating passive-aggressive remarks or indirect policing, she shielded her daughter with a grace that didn't challenge tradition but solely demanded respect. She didn't need to raise her voice or summon a showdown. She had made her expectations known, and in doing so, she effectively removed Camilla's influence over Charlotte's development. The emotional atmosphere around the child began to shift. Where before there had been slight tension in shared spaces, now there was ease. Charlotte sat straighter, not because she was being watched, but because she no longer feared being undermined. Even Charles, who had long harbored hopes that the women in his life would get along without his mediation, stepped back after witnessing Catherine's resolve. He had always loved Camilla fiercely and supported her place in the royal hierarchy. But as a father-in-law and grandfather, he knew better than to interfere in this maternal boundary. Though he had seen the signs before, the way Charlotte sometimes hesitated around Camilla, the way Catherine gently redirected her, he hadn't acted. But now, after that summer, he began to hold back. When tensions surfaced again during family gatherings, he chose silence. In private, he offered no defense, knowing full well that power had shifted without drama, and interfering would only show his failure to intervene earlier. To the public eye, everything remained polished and seamless. The photographs showed a smiling royal family. The speeches were harmonious, the joint appearances efficient. Nothing seemed different, but to those within the royal household, the truth was quietly acknowledged. The lines had been redrawn. No dramatic fallout, no scandal, just a subtle reordering of influence, so skillfully executed that only the perceptive could trace it back to a single moment of confrontation between a mother and a stepmother. In losing this influence, Camilla also lost something she had taken for granted, a kind of maternal authority in Catherine's household. She had, perhaps unknowingly, placed herself as a guide to the younger generation, nudging and prodding them into the version of royalty she believed in. But with Catherine's stance came the reminder that true motherhood is not shared through titles or roles, but through emotional safety and trust. Camilla found herself on the outside of that intimate circle, no longer able to shape Charlotte's behavior or beliefs under the guise of tradition or refinement. The effect of all this was most beautifully seen in Charlotte herself. Freed from the undercurrent of judgment, she began to blossom. She laughed more openly during public engagements, danced with less restraint at family events, and asked more questions during outings. She no longer looked toward her mother with a nervous glance when Camilla approached. Instead, she held her own, assured by a confidence instilled by Catherine's protective love. Teachers at school began to remark on her self-assuredness, her growing comfort in speaking up. It was not defiance, it was freedom. By the end of that year's summer at Balmoral, the final and most telling moment came. Camilla sat beside Charles during a private luncheon while the children played on the lawn. In years past, she would have offered a comment or directed a correction, but this time she stayed silent. She smiled, lifted her glass, and said nothing when Charlotte, giggling, tumbled in the grass with her brothers. The rest of the family adjusted in ways that were easy to miss unless you were looking closely. George, with his natural sense of responsibility, became more openly protective of Charlotte. At public events, he would instinctively wait for her to catch up before moving forward or glance sideways to make sure she was comfortable. Louis, blissfully unaware of the subtleties swirling around him, continued to be his unfiltered, cheerful self, often breaking the stiffness of formal occasions with a grin or a whispered joke that made his sister laugh. William, too, seemed lighter. The watchfulness he'd carried at certain family gatherings had eased. He no longer had to keep a mental map of seating arrangements or positioning, no longer had to calculate how to shield Charlotte from offhand remarks. Catherine noticed the difference in him, how his smiles came more easily, how his hand rested more often at the small of her back when they walked. Family life still carried its share of royal obligations, but now those moments felt less like trials and more like occasions. Catherine had always been careful to give her children a sense of normality, even in the most formal of settings. But with Charlotte's growing self-assurance, the balance between royal duty and personal comfort seemed to come more naturally. It didn't go unnoticed by William either. He had always been protective of his daughter, perhaps even more so because of the particular challenges she faced in her early encounters with certain members of the family. Now he found himself stepping back more often, letting her speak for herself, letting her shape her own presence. Watching her in conversation with a visiting dignitary at a charity event, listening intently, answering questions with a polite but confident voice, William felt a surge of pride as a father. There were still moments when old patterns threatened to creep back in. At one spring luncheon, a subtle remark was made, one that might have once caused Charlotte to withdraw. This time, she met it with a nod, then pivoted the conversation to something she cared more about: the charity's work with children in rural communities. It was a graceful redirect, one that even drew a smile from the person who had made the initial comment. Catherine caught William's eye from across the table, and the shared glance said it all. She's got this. As the meal moved into dessert, Charlotte leaned forward, engaging an older guest in a discussion about the challenges faced by schools without adequate resources. She listened attentively, her eyes bright, asking thoughtful questions that made the table pause. It was clear she wasn't speaking to impress. She was speaking because she genuinely cared. William's expression softened, the kind of pride that's quiet, but deeply felt. Catherine rested her hands in her lap, keeping her composure, though inside her heart was swelling. Later, as the gathering began to break apart into smaller conversations, Charlotte excused herself politely from one group and moved toward a younger cousin who seemed shy and out of place. Without prompting, she knelt down beside the child, speaking in a low, reassuring voice. Within minutes, the cousin was laughing at something Charlotte had said, and the two disappeared toward the terrace, giggling in the spring air. From a distance, Catherine observed this with satisfaction. It wasn't just about withstanding a single remark, it was about developing a confidence rooted in empathy, the kind that could weather more than just casual comments. William joined her side, slipping his hand into hers briefly, as if to say they were on the right path. The afternoon wore on, and conversations drifted to lighter matters. Yet, Catherine noticed something important. The person who had made the earlier remarks seemed to be watching Charlotte differently now. Perhaps seeing not a child to be critiqued, but a young person with a mind and heart of her own. Respect, genuinity, and understanding had begun to replace old dynamics. When it was time to leave, Charlotte walked back into the hall with her cousin, both carrying a small plate of leftover scones to share later. She bid farewell to each guest with a handshake or a quick hug, depending on their relationship. It was small, unremarkable to some, but to Catherine, it was everything. Charlotte herself began to flourish in this steadier ground. Freed from the stern undercurrent of criticism, she seemed to stand taller, both in posture and in spirit. At charity visits with her parents, she spoke up more, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke more in conversations that interested her. When she attended a children's art workshop at a London gallery, she surprised even the organizers by helping a younger boy mix colors for his painting. "You have to add just a little," she explained patiently, "or it turns muddy." The moment made the rounds on social media, not because it was grand, but because it was genuine. At home, Catherine saw her daughter's confidence blooming in small but telling ways. Charlotte started taking the lead in choosing her own reading material, gravitating toward books about explorers, scientists, and even historical queens. She began practicing her piano without prompting, sometimes calling her brothers in to listen to a piece she'd mastered. The shift wasn't just maturity, it was the freedom of feeling safe in her own skin. Camilla, for her part, seemed to accept the boundaries that had been firmly set. She still had her moments of grandeur in public life, but when it came to Charlotte, she kept things cordial and measured. Whether out of self-awareness or simple practicality, she no longer tested the edges of their relationship. In some ways, the new distance worked to her advantage. It kept public optics neat, without stirring speculation. As spring gave way to summer, the family appeared together at Trooping the Color. The sun was bright, the crowds were loud, and Charlotte, standing between her brothers, waved confidently to the throngs below. George leaned in to point out a regiment's banner, and Louis, in his typical fashion, made a face that made her giggle. Behind them, Catherine and William exchanged a glance, one of pride. It wasn't a perfect form of peace. In the monarchy, perhaps there never is. But it was enough for now, a space where Charlotte could grow, her voice strong and unshaken, surrounded by people who wanted to hear it. And in that space, she was beginning to chart her own place in the story, one that no one else could rewrite for her. What do you think about Camilla's interactions with Charlotte? Do you think she's building a lasting legacy, or she's asserting dominance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.